I've lived in Portland, Oregon, for almost 8 years now, though sometimes it feels like I never really moved here, more like I washed ashore and just stayed. The city's weather has that effect on people. Gray skies that feel like they've been around longer than your own memories, rain that doesn't pound so much as it lingers, and streets that smell faintly of wet cedar and old coffee grounds. I came here at 24, fresh out of college, thinking I'd find some big version of myself that didn't exist in my small Ohio town. My parents had been, well, not thrilled, but not exactly surprised either. My mom had given me that look over the kitchen table the night I told her. The one that says, "You've always been restless. Just don't disappear completely." I got a job at a mid-sized marketing agency downtown. Nothing glamorous. Mostly social media campaigns for small businesses. The kind of work where you learn more about scheduling posts than creativity. Still, it paid rent on my tiny one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. And it gave me an excuse to say I was doing something with my life. If you'd asked me back then if I believed in love, I would have given you a sarcastic answer. I wasn't bitter exactly, but I was skeptical. Love seemed like one of those things everyone talked about, but when you looked closer, most of it was either people settling for what they could get or holding on to something long past its expiration date. My dating life had been a series of half-hearted relationships, the kind where you know it's not going anywhere, but it's easier than being alone. And then there was her. It was a Thursday morning in March when I first saw Emily Stor1es. I remember the day so clearly, not because of some lightning bolt moment, but because it was the kind of day you'd normally forget. Overcast, a little drizzle, the air smelling faintly of burned espresso from the cafe below my apartment. I was running late to work, as usual, and ducked into the bakery to grab a coffee and a croissant. She was there at the counter, flipping through a notebook while waiting for her drink. Dark brown hair pulled into a messy bun, a paint smudge on the side of her hand like she'd been in the middle of creating something before she left the house. She was wearing a faded denim jacket, and even from a few feet away I could see her eyes were the kind that made you forget what you were supposed to say. She glanced up and caught me looking. I panicked and did that stupid half-smile guys do when they're trying to play it cool. She smiled back, just a quick, polite one, and went back to her notebook. When she left, I told myself it was nothing. Just another stranger you pass in the city. But she kept showing up. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing her in the mornings. Sometimes she'd be at a corner table by the window, sketching in that same notebook. Sometimes she'd be at the counter, chatting with the barista like they knew each other well. I told myself I wasn't watching her, but I was. Finally, one morning, she was sitting alone, and the seat across from her was open. I don't know what possessed me, but I walked over with my coffee and said, "Is this seat taken?" She looked up amused. "Do you always ask strangers that, or is this a special occasion?" I grinned. "Special occasion. I'm trying to get over my fear of rejection." That made her laugh, a real laugh, not the polite kind, and that's how it started. We talked for nearly an hour that first morning, though it felt shorter. Emily was a freelance illustrator, mostly working on children's books and small commissions for local businesses. She'd grown up in Eugene, gone to art school in Seattle, then moved back to Oregon because, as she put it, "I needed a city that didn't chew me up." There was something easy about the way she spoke, unhurried, like she didn't feel the need to impress me or rush the silence. Every so often she'd glance toward the window, as if watching the rain was part of the conversation too. When I finally stood to leave, she closed her notebook and said, "Same time tomorrow?" I said yes before my brain could come up with reasons to be cautious. The next morning, I got to the bakery 10 minutes early. She arrived 5 minutes late, balancing 2 coffees in a cardboard tray. "One's for you," she said, setting it down in front of me. I asked the barista what you usually get. "Well," I said, "now I have to buy you breakfast or I'll feel like a terrible person." She smiled. Deal. That became our unspoken ritual. Morning coffee, a little banter, and the slow drip of learning about each other's lives. She liked old movies, hated olives, and had a habit of doodling on napkins when she was thinking. I told her about growing up in Ohio, About my mom's meatloaf and my dad's stubborn silence. About my job and marketing that was fine but not fulfilling. She asked questions like she actually wanted the answers, which is rarer than you'd think. It was maybe 3 weeks into our routine when Emily suggested we meet outside the bakery. "There's a night market on Saturday," she said. "Live music, food trucks, weird art. Want to check it out?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because it felt like crossing some invisible line. Mornings at a bakery were one thing, spending an evening together was another. But I said yes. Saturday came with one of those rare clear skies Portland gets in spring. The night market was buzzing with people, strings of lights crisscrossing above us, the smell of grilled food mixing with incense from some nearby booth. Emily wore a simple black dress with a leather jacket, her hair loose and wavy. I tried not to look like I was staring, but I was. We wandered between stalls, sampling fried dumplings and candied almonds. At one booth, a guy was selling handmade rings. Emily picked one up, a thin silver band with a small turquoise stone. "Pretty," she said, then set it back down. Before I could stop myself, I bought it. She laughed when I handed it to her. "We're not even dating and you're buying me jewelry? Consider it a thank you," I said, "for not ignoring me at the bakery." She slid it onto her finger, and for some reason, it felt like the beginning of something. That night, when I walked her back to her apartment, we stood on the sidewalk for a long time, not quite saying goodbye. The streetlight above us flickered, the city quiet except for a distant siren. "Thanks for tonight," she said softly. I wanted to kiss her. I thought about it. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "See you Monday?" She smiled. "Yeah. See you Monday." That Monday, I noticed I'd started dressing just a little better before heading out. Not in an obvious way, no pressed shirts or cologne, but my hoodie was clean, my hair wasn't doing its usual. I just rolled out of bed. Impression, Emily noticed. "Look at you," she said when I slid into the chair across from her. "All neat and presentable. Who's the lucky girl?" I smirked. "You're hilarious." But the truth was, mornings felt different now. I didn't drag myself to the bakery just for caffeine anymore. I came because she'd be there, sketchbook in hand, coffee half drunk, ready to toss me some sarcastic comment about my day. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me about a nightmare client who wanted cartoons but like realistic, and kept sending her reference images of photorealistic squirrels wearing suits. I told her about my boss deciding we should rebrand a plumbing company to appeal to Gen Z, which somehow involved TikTok videos about drain clogs. Our conversations became the best part of my day. It happened on a Thursday night. I was eating takeout pad thai and watching a documentary I wasn't really interested in when my phone lit up. "Emily Stor1es calling." I answered. "Hey. Everything okay?" She laughed. "You answered the phone like a dad." "Sorry, I'm just surprised. We're usually a strictly in-person friendship." "Yeah, well, I needed someone to talk to, and you made the list." Her voice was lighter than usual, but there was something in it, a tired edge, maybe. She told me she'd had a fight with her sister. "It's stupid," she said. "She thinks I should get a real job." I told her art is a real job. It just doesn't come with a 401k and a cubicle. I listened, offering the occasional "yeah" or "I get that." Somewhere between her venting and my bad jokes, the conversation shifted into the kind that feels like you've stepped into a warmer room. We talked about childhoods, hers filled with road trips in a beat-up minivan, mine quieter, small-town predictable. By the time we hung up, it was past midnight. I lay there in the dark, phone still in my hand, wondering when she'd slipped past my defenses. Over the next month, we started seeing each other outside the bakery more often. Sometimes it was lunch breaks, sometimes evenings wandering through Powell's books, sometimes sitting by the river with takeout. We weren't dating, not officially. But there were moments, little flashes, when the air between us felt different, like the time we were crossing the street and she grabbed my hand without thinking. Or when I walked her home in the rain and she leaned into me, our shoulders pressed together under my umbrella. Still, I hesitated. I'd been in that gray area before, the almost relationship, the not quite there, and it never ended cleanly. But Emily wasn't like anyone I'd met before. She didn't play games, didn't act like she was waiting for me to prove something. She was just there. Present. One Friday night, we were at her apartment, a third-floor walk-up with tall windows and plants in every corner. She was showing me her latest project, an illustrated children's book about a fox who collected lost things. "Do you ever wonder if you're where you're supposed to be?" she asked suddenly, not looking up from the page she was working on. "All the time," I said. "And most days I think I'm not." She looked at me then, her expression unreadable. "Me too." The thing about those kinds of late-night confessions is they don't just disappear. They hang in the air, even when you're back to your regular banter. The next few days, I kept thinking about what Emily had said, "me too," and wondering just how far off course she felt. One morning at the bakery, I caught her staring out the window, not touching her coffee. "Hey," I said. "You okay?" She blinked, like she'd forgotten where she was. "Yeah. Just thinking about deadlines. And rent. And how my fridge currently contains half a jar of pickles and an open bottle of wine. Sounds like a feast to me," I said, trying to make her smile. It worked, but only a little. That Friday, my boss told me we were losing one of our bigger clients. Translation: no bonuses this year, and everyone should be prepared for adjustments. Corporate speak for we might start cutting people. I left the office later than usual, walking through streets slick with rain. My phone buzzed. "Emily. Feel like getting a drink?" she asked. I didn't even go home first. We met at a small bar near the river, the kind with dim lights and a jukebox in the corner. She was already there, sitting at the bar with a gin and tonic. "You look like someone who just got bad news," she said when I sat down. I told her about work, about the possibility of layoffs, about how much I hated pretending I cared about branding for frozen pizza companies. She listened, the way she always did, fully, without checking her phone or interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You ever think about quitting?" "All the time. But then I remember I need to eat." "Yeah," she said, swirling the ice in her glass. "That's the trick, isn't it?" We left the bar just after 10, the city quiet except for the hum of traffic on the bridge. Emily suggested we walk along the river. It was cold, but not in a way that made you want to rush home. The water was dark, reflecting the streetlights in long, broken lines. At one point, she stopped walking. "You ever get scared that this is it? That life is just a series of almosts?" I looked at her, unsure how honest to be. "Yeah. More than I want to admit." She nodded slowly, like she understood something about me that I hadn't said. We kept walking, our shoulders brushing now and then. At one point, her hand found mine. She didn't look at me, and I didn't look at her. We just kept walking like that, the city stretching out on either side of us. After that night, something changed. We didn't label it, didn't talk about it, but there was a closeness that hadn't been there before. She started texting me more, little things, like a photo of her cat tangled in a blanket or a rant about a client who wanted the color blue, but not that blue. I found myself thinking about her at odd moments. During meetings, in line at the grocery store, on the bus ride home. One Saturday, we spent the whole day together without planning to. It started with coffee, then turned into browsing thrift stores, then grabbing lunch, then cooking dinner at her place. By the time I left, it was close to midnight. When I hugged her goodbye, she lingered just a little longer than usual, and that was the moment I knew I was in trouble. It happened on a Wednesday night, which somehow made it feel more real than if it had been some carefully orchestrated weekend moment. Emily had texted me around 7, "I made too much pasta. Come help." Her apartment smelled like garlic and basil when I walked in. She was barefoot, hair in a messy bun, wearing an oversized hoodie that said Oregon Coast across the front. We ate at her tiny kitchen table, talking about nothing, the weird ad I'd seen on the bus, the book she just finished, the fact that her upstairs neighbor seemed to vacuum at exactly 9:17 every night. After dinner, we sat on the couch with a bottle of cheap red wine. She curled her legs under her, facing me, her knee brushing mine every so often. At some point, the conversation slowed. She was looking at me in that way people do when they're deciding something, and then she just leaned in. It wasn't a dramatic kiss, no fireworks, no swelling music. Just her lips on mine, soft and warm, tasting faintly of wine. But it was enough to make the rest of the room disappear. When she pulled back, she gave a small, almost shy smile. Sorry. I've been wanting to do that for weeks. I grinned. Don't be sorry. After that night, our routines shifted without us even discussing it. I started spending more evenings at her place, sometimes sleeping over. She'd leave her sketchbook open on the coffee table while I answered work emails. We'd cook together, badly but with enthusiasm, and binge-watch old sitcoms until we were too tired to keep our eyes open. It felt easy, dangerously easy, but there was still a part of me holding back, some reflex left over from past relationships where I jumped in too fast and watched everything unravel. One night, as we lay on her couch under a blanket, she asked, "Do you believe in soulmates?" I hesitated. I believe in the right timing. And maybe the right person showing up at the right time. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I think timing is a scam. You either want to be with someone or you don't." I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because her words hit closer to something I didn't want to admit, that maybe I was already more in this than I'd planned. It wasn't all perfect. Her freelance work was unpredictable, and there were weeks when she'd be stressed about money, snapping at small things, retreating into her sketching. My job was still under the threat of cuts, and I'd find myself distracted, checking my email obsessively, waiting for the layoff notice. One night, we argued over something stupid, whether we should order pizza or cook. It wasn't about pizza. It was about the fact that we were both quietly carrying bigger worries and neither of us was saying them out loud. She ended up sitting at the far end of the couch, arms crossed, sketching in silence. I washed dishes just to have something to do with my hands. Eventually, she said, "I'm sorry. I hate feeling like I'm always one bad month away from drowning." I dried my hands and sat down beside her. "Yeah. I get it." We didn't solve anything that night, but we didn't break either. The layoff notice didn't come in an email. It came in the form of my manager calling me into a glass-walled conference room on a Tuesday afternoon, closing the door, and giving me the kind of sympathetic smile people use when they've already practiced it in the mirror. "We're restructuring," she said. "Your position isn't part of the new plan." I nodded like I'd been expecting it, because I had, but still, my stomach felt like it had dropped through the floor. They gave me a severance check and a cardboard box for my things. By the time I stepped out into the damp February air, it was barely 4 o'clock and already getting dark. I didn't know where to go, so I went to Emily's. She opened the door in paint-splattered sweatpants, hair up, music playing low in the background. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "I lost my job." Her eyes softened. She stepped forward and pulled me into a hug, the kind where you don't realize how much you needed it until it's happening. "Sit," she said. "I'll make tea." We spent the evening at her small kitchen table. I told her everything, the way they'd said it, the relief I felt mixed with the fear, the sudden weight of having nowhere to be in the morning. "You'll figure it out," she said like it was the simplest truth in the world. "You're smart, and you're stubborn. That's a dangerous combination." It made me laugh, even if I didn't fully believe her. Losing a job changes the rhythm of your days in ways you don't expect. Mornings stretched longer. Afternoons blurred together. I applied for positions half-heartedly, scrolling job boards until the words stopped meaning anything. Emily tried to keep me busy. We went on long walks through the neighborhood, visited thrift stores, cooked dinners that actually turned out okay. But there were days I stayed in bed until noon, scrolling my phone and pretending I didn't feel useless. One rainy Tuesday, she came over with grocery bags. "We're making soup," she said, not asking if I wanted to. We chopped vegetables in her kitchen, the windows fogging up from the steam. She talked about a new client, about a mural she might paint for a local cafe. I mostly listened, but the sound of her voice made the apartment feel warmer. It was late March when I noticed she'd been quieter than usual. She still smiled, still showed up, but there was a distance in her eyes sometimes, like she was thinking about something she didn't want to share. One night, I asked. She hesitated, then said, "I'm late." It took me a second to realize what she meant. "Oh," I said. "Like how late?" "2 weeks." I sat there, my mind spinning. We hadn't been careless, but nothing's ever guaranteed. "I'm not ready to know yet," she said quietly. I needed to tell someone." I reached for her hand. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "You always say that." The next few days felt longer than they should have. We didn't talk about it much, but it was there, sitting in the quiet moments between sentences. I could see it in the way Emily would stare at her coffee, lost in thought, or the way she'd scroll her phone without really looking at the screen. One night, we were lying on her couch watching a show neither of us was paying attention to. She suddenly said, "I'm going to the clinic tomorrow." I nodded. "Do you want me to come with you?" She hesitated. "No. I think I need to do this alone. But I'll call you after." I wanted to argue, to insist on being there, but I could tell by the set of her jaw that this was something she needed to handle in her own way. The next afternoon, I sat in my apartment pretending to work on my resume. My phone finally buzzed around 2. Not pregnant. That was all the text said, but it was enough for the tension in my chest to loosen. "How do you feel?" I typed back. There was a long pause before she replied, relieved. "And kind of sad?" I don't know why. I stared at the screen, unsure what to say. I didn't fully understand my own feelings either. Relief, yes. But also a strange hollow ache I couldn't name. That night, we sat at her kitchen table, both of us picking at leftover pasta. She finally said, "If it had been positive, would you have stayed?" I looked at her, startled. "Of course I would have stayed." "Why would you even? Because," she said, cutting me off, "a lot of people don't. And I didn't know if we've defined what we are enough for you to know." I set my fork down. "Emily, I'm here. Job or no job, label or no label, I'm here." She looked down at her plate, but I could see the way her shoulders eased just a little. The weeks after that felt almost like a reset. The scare was behind us, and somehow it had pulled us a little closer, even if either of us said it out loud. I picked up some freelance marketing work, small projects for local shops that barely paid the bills, but gave me a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Emily landed the mural project she'd mentioned. I spent a Saturday afternoon with her at the cafe, holding a ladder and handing her brushes while she painted a sprawling scene of mountains and rivers across the wall. She had paint on her cheek, her hair pulled back, her eyes focused in that way they did when she was completely absorbed. "Looks incredible," I said when she finally stepped down. She grinned. "It's not done yet. But thanks." And for the first time in weeks, it felt like maybe we were both moving forward again. Just when things started to feel steady, the past made itself known. One evening, as Emily and I were walking home from the grocery store, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then hesitated before answering. "Hey," she said, her voice polite but tight. I could hear a man's voice on the other end, low and familiar. After a few minutes, she hung up and looked at me, her eyes shadowed. "That was Jake," she said quietly. "My ex." I nodded, not sure what to say. "He's back in town," she continued. "Says he wants to talk." Jake wasn't someone I liked hearing about. He was a sharp contrast to Emily, more reckless, more unpredictable. They'd broken up badly, with a lot of shouting and hurt feelings. Emily insisted she was done with him, but I could tell the calls shook her. We didn't talk much about Jake, but the tension grew. Some nights, Emily would be distant, lost in her thoughts. Other nights, she'd tell me stories from before we met, places she'd been, mistakes she'd made. I realized that loving someone meant loving their history, the good and the bad, the light and the shadows. One Saturday, Jake showed up at Emily's door unannounced. I wasn't there, but she told me later about the conversation, angry words, apologies that sounded half-hearted, and the reminder that some things don't just disappear. "I told him no," she said firmly. "I'm with you now." I believed her. But I also knew this was a moment we both remembered. It wasn't easy. Love rarely is. We kept building, day by day, sometimes stepping on each other's toes, sometimes pulling apart just enough to remember why we needed each other. There were bills to pay, deadlines to meet, doubts to silence. There were mornings when I wanted to stay in bed, and evenings when she wanted to run away. But through it all, there was something steady. Something real. Emily once said, "Life isn't about the big moments. It's about the quiet ones in between." I think she was right. Spring was turning into summer, and my job search was becoming less hopeful. I applied for everything from freelance gigs to temp positions, but rejection emails piled up faster than I could keep track. Emily tried to be optimistic. "It's not about luck," she said one morning as we shared breakfast. "It's about persistence." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But some nights, lying awake in the dark, I felt like I was running in place, exhausted but not moving forward. Then, finally, a break. A local nonprofit needed someone to manage their social media for a 3-month project. It wasn't much, and the pay was modest, but it was something. The first day, I showed up early, determined to prove I belonged there. The team was small but passionate, and their mission felt meaningful in a way my old job never had. Emily was proud. "See? You just needed the right place." Things started to fall into a rhythm. I worked mornings at the nonprofit. Emily worked afternoons painting murals and freelancing. Evenings were ours, though sometimes stress leaked in, deadlines looming, money tight, the constant balancing act of two lives trying to merge without losing themselves. One night, after a long day, I found Emily crying over an email from a client who'd canceled a project. I pulled her close. "We'll figure this out." Her voice was muffled. "I know. I'm just tired." I didn't have the right words, so I just held her. To escape the city for a bit, we drove to the coast one weekend. The ocean was cold, the air sharp and salty. We walked along the beach, collecting smooth stones and skipping rocks. That trip reminded me why I'd stayed in Portland all those years, for moments like this, quiet and unforced, with someone who made the gray days feel a little brighter. Emily looked at me and smiled. "Thanks for coming." I smiled back. "Thanks for asking." Back in the city, old memories crept in quietly. One evening, I ran into Sarah, an old college friend, at a coffee shop. She smiled warmly, asked about my life, and I felt the pull of what once was easy conversations, shared jokes, the comfort of familiarity. Emily noticed my distraction later that night. "You thinking about her?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "No. Just memories." She nodded, understanding that everyone carries ghosts, and sometimes they visit when you least expect. Tensions bubbled beneath the surface one night. Money was tight. Emily's client canceled another project, and I was frustrated with my temporary job's endless hours. We snapped at each other over something trivial. Who forgot to buy milk? But it quickly spiraled into deeper issues. "I feel like I'm drowning," Emily said, tears in her eyes. "I'm trying, okay?" I shouted back, the guilt thick in my throat. We didn't talk for the rest of the night, but when I woke up, she was gone. Losing a job changes the rhythm of your days in ways you don't expect. Mornings stretched longer. Afternoons blurred together. I applied for positions half-heartedly, scrolling job boards until the words stopped meaning anything. Emily tried to keep me busy. We went on long walks through the neighborhood, visited thrift stores, cooked dinners that actually turned out okay. But there were days I stayed in bed until noon, scrolling my phone and pretending I didn't feel useless. One rainy Tuesday, she came over with grocery bags. "We're making soup," she said, not asking if I wanted to. We chopped vegetables in her kitchen, the windows fogging up from the steam. She talked about a new client, about a mural she might paint for a local cafe. I mostly listened, but the sound of her voice made the apartment feel warmer. I found her at a nearby park, sitting on a bench staring at the city skyline. "Emily," I said softly. She looked up, eyes red but steady. "I'm sorry," I said. "For the yelling, for the stress. I don't want us to fall apart." She took my hand. "Neither do I." We stayed there for a long time, holding on to each other against the weight of everything else. After that night in the park, we made a silent promise to try harder. Emily found a small art show downtown to display some of her work, and I helped with the setup. The reception was modest, but seeing her smile as people admired her paintings made every setback feel worth it. I was still juggling my temp job and freelance gigs, but there was a lightness between us, a sense that we were building something real. Just when I thought we'd found some balance, I got a call from my mom. Dad was sick. Hearing the worry in her voice pulled me back to Ohio in an instant, the quiet house. The smell of my mom's cooking, the unspoken tensions between them. Emily understood when I told her. "Go," she said simply. "I'll hold things down here." Back in Ohio, I spent weeks between hospital visits and long talks with my parents. Dad was stubborn, refusing to admit how bad it really was. Mom held everything together but looked exhausted beneath her calm. I realized how much I'd been avoiding those parts of my life. The unresolved arguments, the things left unsaid. Being away from Emily was harder than I expected. We talked on the phone every night, but it wasn't the same as the easy companionship we had in Portland. I missed her quiet presence, the way she laughed at my bad jokes. The small rituals we shared. The distance stretched between us like an invisible thread, thin but strong. We texted and called, shared photos and little updates, but the missing pieces were the small moments. The morning coffee, the touch on the arm, the shared silence. Emily surprised me one weekend, showing up at my parents' house with a suitcase and her sketchbook. "I couldn't wait anymore," she said, and suddenly the distance felt smaller. Being back in Ohio with Emily brought old family tensions to the surface. Mom wasn't sure about her. Dad barely said a word. One afternoon, after a quiet dinner, Mom pulled me aside. "She's good for you," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "But you have to remember where you come from." That reminder wasn't lost on me. Emily and I found ways to create a space for ourselves amidst the chaos. Late-night talks on the porch, slow walks in the park, laughter over burnt toast. We talked about the future, not as a far-off dream, but as something we could build together, one day at a time. After a month, I returned to Portland with Emily. The city felt different, like we'd both changed in the time apart. But when we walked the rainy streets, hand in hand, it felt like home. Again, returning to Portland wasn't just about geography. It felt like stepping into a new chapter. Emily and I found a small apartment in a quieter neighborhood, the kind of place with creaky floors and a shared garden out back. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I started a part-time job at a local bookstore while continuing my freelance marketing work. Emily's murals were getting more attention, and she was finally booking steady projects. Balancing 2 jobs and a growing relationship was exhausting. Some days I felt like I was running on empty, juggling client emails, inventory at the bookstore, and trying to be present for Emily. She noticed. One evening, she surprised me with a homemade dinner, candles, and no phones allowed. "We need this," she said. "Us time." Emily met my parents over the summer. They were warm but reserved, the usual blend of curiosity and cautious approval. Later, Emily told me she'd been nervous but that it went better than she expected. "I want them to like you," I said. "They do," she smiled. "They just don't always show it the same way." One rainy afternoon, as I was stocking shelves at the bookstore, an old coworker from my marketing days stopped by. He mentioned an opening at a new startup, something creative, fast-paced, with potential for growth. I hesitated but decided to apply. I got the call a few days later. The startup wanted me for an interview. It felt like a second chance. A chance to prove to myself that I wasn't stuck in the rut I'd been in for so long. Emily was supportive but cautious. "Just don't forget to breathe," she said. The morning of the interview, I dressed in the only suit I owned, a bit wrinkled but clean. Walking into the office, I was hit by a buzz of energy, young people moving fast, walls covered in colorful art and motivational quotes. The interview was tough but fair. I talked about my experience, my vision, and why I wanted to grow with them. After the interview, the waiting was the hardest part. Emily tried to keep me distracted with movies and long walks. I tried not to obsess over my phone, but every buzz made my heart jump. When the phone rang late one evening, I nearly dropped it. "It's us," the voice said. "We'd like to offer you the position." Relief and excitement flooded me. Emily jumped up and hugged me tight. "We did it," she said. Starting the new job brought a rush of excitement, but also unexpected pressure. The startup was fast-paced, and deadlines came crashing like waves. I found myself working late nights, trying to prove I belonged. Emily noticed the change. One evening, she caught me scrolling through emails at midnight. "You're burning out," she said softly. I shrugged. "I just want this to work." She took my hand. "I want it to work too, but not if you lose yourself." Over the next few weeks, I tried to slow down. We set boundaries: no work talk after 8 p.m., weekends reserved for us. It wasn't perfect. Stress still crept in, but we were learning how to navigate it together. Emily started planning a new mural, one that was personal and raw, a reflection of everything we'd been through. The mural became a symbol for us. I'd visit her site after work, watching colors come alive on the wall as the days went by. We talked about future plans, a place of our own, maybe even starting a small business together someday. There were fears, sure, but hope was stronger. One Saturday afternoon, Emily and I ran into Mark, an old friend from my college days, at a coffee shop downtown. He was friendly but carried a subtle edge, asking about my new job, about Emily, and about where I saw myself in 5 years. After he left, I felt a strange restlessness. "Who was that?" Emily asked. "Just someone from the past," I said, though the truth was I wasn't sure what to make of it. That night, Emily and I talked for hours. We opened up about fears, doubts, and dreams, the kind of talks that cut past small talk and get to the heart of things. "I'm scared I'll mess this up," I admitted. She squeezed my hand. "We're both scared. But that's what makes it real." A few weeks later, work stress and personal tensions collided. I missed a deadline, and Emily was frustrated about a client pulling out last minute. We argued, loudly, painfully. I stormed out, needing space, but couldn't shake the feeling that maybe we were on the edge. After cooling off, I reached out to Emily. We met at a small park, sitting on a bench under fading autumn leaves. "I don't want to lose us," I said. "Me neither," she replied. We talked about what we needed: patience, communication, and the space to grow both together and individually. Winter crept in slowly, painting the city with gray skies and quiet snowfalls. Emily and I moved into a new apartment, a cozy place with big windows that caught the morning light just right. We decorated it together, mixing her art with my old vinyl records and thrift store finds. It felt like the start of something lasting. My new job was growing more demanding, but I found ways to carve out time for Emily and myself. She landed a commission for a public art project, a mural on a community center wall, telling stories of local history. We celebrated quietly one evening over takeout, toasting to progress and possibility. Despite the progress, old anxieties lingered. One night, I woke up in a panic, the fear of failing, of losing what we built, pressing heavy on my chest. Emily held me close, whispering, "We're in this together." We kept moving forward, day by day. The road wasn't perfect, but it was ours, full of small victories, late-night talks, and the kind of love that's patient and real. It was a chilly evening in late February when Emily and I sat on our apartment balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights blur through the fog. She had been quieter than usual all day, lost in thought. I asked if something was wrong, but she just shook her head and smiled softly. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. "Open it," she said. Inside was a ticket, a one-way flight to New York City, dated for 2 weeks from that day. "I've been offered a chance to work with a big gallery," she said. "It's everything I've been working for." I blinked, heart pounding. "And what about us?" She looked at me with a mixture of hope and sadness. "This isn't just about me. It's about both of us, growing, chasing dreams, even if it means taking different paths for a while." For a long time, we sat in silence, the weight of what this meant settling between us. I realized that love wasn't always about staying side by side. Sometimes it was about knowing when to let go, or when to hold on in a different way. "I want you to go," I finally said. "Because you deserve it. And because I trust us enough to believe we'll find our way back." Emily smiled, tears glistening. Thank you? The next 2 weeks were a blur of packing, late night talks, and bittersweet goodbyes. When she left, the apartment felt emptier than ever. But there was also a quiet strength in knowing that love, real love, doesn't always fit the stories we expect. It changes, stretches, sometimes fades, but it never really disappears. Months later, a package arrived. Inside were letters, written by Emily on the road, filled with sketches, memories, and hopes. We weren't sure what the future held, but for now, our story was still unfolding, in quiet moments, across miles. And in the spaces between dreams.